In the late 20th century, Coca-Cola's presence in Colombia and Guatemala became the center of a deadly controversy. Labor unions accused the company's local bottlers of colluding with paramilitary forces to intimidate, kidnap, and even murder union leaders. The allegations sparked lawsuits, protests, and an international boycott campaign under the slogan, "Killer Coke." While Coca-Cola denied direct involvement, critics pointed to the company's economic influence and the role of its bottlers in violent union suppression. What followed was a battle between corporate power, labor rights, and political violence that left a lasting stain on Coca-Cola's history. Colombia has long been one of the most dangerous countries in the world for labor organizers. By the 1980s and 1990s, the country was embroiled in a deadly civil conflict between left-wing guerrilla groups, such as the FARC and ELN, government forces and right-wing paramilitary groups, often backed by business interests. Unions were frequently labeled as subversives or guerrilla sympathizers, making them targets for assassinations. Coca-Cola's bottling operations in Colombia were run by Bebidas y Alimentos and Panamco, a subsidiary of the Mexican Coca-Cola bottler FEMSA. In 1996, a Coca-Cola union leader, Isidro Gil, was assassinated at the Carepa bottling plant in the Urabá region, a known paramilitary stronghold. According to reports, Gil was shot by paramilitaries linked to the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, or AUC, a right-wing militia responsible for numerous human rights violations. The next day, gunmen returned to the plant, ordering union members to resign or face the same fate. This was not an isolated incident. In 2002, another union leader, Adolfo de Jesus Munera Lopez, was murdered in Barranquilla. He had been dismissed from his job and later killed at his home. Witnesses and labor activists claimed that Coca-Cola bottlers had links to the paramilitary groups responsible for these killings. In 2001, the US-based International Labor Rights Fund and the Colombian union Sinaltranal filed a lawsuit in Florida under the Alien Tort Claims Act. The lawsuit alleged that Coca-Cola had effectively allowed its bottlers to use paramilitary forces to silence union activity. The case targeted Panamco and Bebidas y Alimentos, arguing that they had directly benefited from the elimination of labor organizers. However, Coca-Cola argued that it did not own these bottlers and had no control over their security practices. In 2006, the case was dismissed, with the US courts ruling that there was insufficient evidence to link Coca-Cola's parent company to the violence. Despite this, the controversy sparked global protests, boycotts, and the Killer Coke campaign, which aimed to expose Coca-Cola's alleged complicity in these crimes. Guatemala's Coca-Cola controversy began in the 1970s, at the height of the country's brutal civil war, which lasted from 1960 to 1996. The war saw government-backed death squads assassinate labor leaders, student activists, and political dissidents. Multinational corporations, including Coca-Cola, were accused of benefiting from the climate of violence. One of the most infamous periods occurred under the ownership of the Fiorito family, who ran Coca-Cola's Guatemala City bottling plant. Under their management, union leaders were systematically targeted, with multiple murders and disappearances reported. In 1976, José Armando Palacios, a union organizer, was gunned down outside the bottling plant. In 1979, 3 more union leaders were assassinated in broad daylight. In 1980, Pedro Quevedo, another Coca-Cola worker, was kidnapped and found dead shortly after. Workers claimed that management openly collaborated with security forces to dismantle unions. The Fiorito family eventually sold the plant in 1985, but the cycle of violence continued into the 1990s. In 1989, a new owner, Carlos Enrique Pinto, took control of the plant. While violence decreased compared to the Fiorito era, reports still surfaced of union suppression tactics including threats, firings, and intimidation. Despite Coca-Cola's insistence that it was not directly responsible for the actions of its bottlers, the company faced increasing scrutiny. Human rights organizations, including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, accused Coca-Cola of turning a blind eye to systematic abuses. The Killer Coke campaign, led by activist Ray Rogers, gained significant traction, urging universities and businesses to boycott Coca-Cola products. In 2005, the University of Michigan temporarily suspended its contract with Coca-Cola due to concerns over Colombia's human rights violations. Coca-Cola responded by commissioning an independent report from the International Labor Organization, which claimed that there was no evidence that Coca-Cola bottlers orchestrated the killings. However, critics argued that the report was too limited in scope and failed to address the broader pattern of violence. As pressure mounted, Coca-Cola took steps to improve its labor policies in Latin America. By the late 2000s, Coca-Cola began enforcing stricter labor standards for its bottlers, requiring them to adhere to international labor laws. The company also launched corporate social responsibility initiatives focused on improving worker conditions. However, many critics argue that these changes were purely cosmetic, pointing out that Coca-Cola never publicly acknowledged any wrongdoing in the killings. While the company has since distanced itself from these violent episodes, the legacy of the Coca-Cola killings in Colombia and Guatemala remains a stark reminder of the intersection between corporate power, political violence, and human rights. Coca-Cola survived the scandal, and its global dominance remains unchallenged. However, for the families of Isidro Gil, Adolfo de Jesus Munera Lopez, Jose Armando Palacios, and countless others, the events of the 1980s, 1990s, and early 2000s are not just history. They are a painful reminder of the risks faced by labor activists in the pursuit of basic rights. The controversy surrounding Coca-Cola in Colombia and Guatemala exposes how multinational corporations can thrive in environments of violence and repression, benefiting from weak labor protections and the complicity of authoritarian regimes. While Coca-Cola itself may not have directly ordered these crimes, the company's unwillingness to intervene allowed a culture of fear and suppression to fester. Today, the story of Coca-Cola's dark history in Latin America serves as a case study in corporate accountability, or the lack thereof. And while time has moved forward, the question remains: how many more multinational corporations are complicit in similar human rights abuses across the world?